I'm here with women who encountered Jesus, and I learned a new word today. I'm so excited I learned a new word. Love learning a new word. Never heard of this before. It's called Syrophoenician. Because we're going to talk about the Syrophoenician woman. Now, what does that mean? Syrophoenician. Well, it's a geographical term, and it has to do with a woman who lived in a certain village or a certain area of the world. Just like I would be called an American woman. If someone lived in Alaska, they might be called an Alaskan woman. Or if you lived in the South, you might be called a Southern woman. We use these terms all the time because there are certain characteristics associated with that. If I talk about a Nigerian woman, you get a different picture in your head than if I talk about a Scandinavian woman. And I think that it conjures up a picture in our heads. So when we read Syrophoenician, it doesn't mean much to us, But at that time, it would have meant something. The Syrophoenician woman's story is told in two different Gospels, Mark 7 and Matthew 15. So what's happening here is Jesus is traveling in his ministry. So let's see where he's traveling and how he comes across this woman. I'm going to start, I think, in Matthew 15. And Matthew 15, verse 21 says, "Then Jesus left Galilee and went north to the region of Tyre and Sidon." Tyre is spelled Tyre, Tyre and Sidon. "A Gentile woman who lived there came to him pleading, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, for my daughter is possessed by a demon that torments her severely.'" So here's this woman. First thing we know about a Syrophoenician woman is she is a Gentile. She's not a Jew. So Jesus is leaving Galilee, and let's get our bearings here. Here, Jerusalem is down in the southern area where the Dead Sea is. Okay, Jesus has traveled up into Galilee, where the Sea of Galilee is. Now he's going up northwest, over towards the Mediterranean Sea. And this is where the ports of Tyre and Sidon are. They were merchants. They were very active in trade. So this would not have been a Jewish area. There might have been some Jews there, but it basically was a Gentile area. Today, it would be part of modern-day Lebanon, or maybe even a little bit of a part of Syria or northern Israel, that whole little area where northern Israel, Syria, and Lebanon come together, and the Mediterranean is there. That is where Tyre and Sidon were. Okay, so Syrophoenician, really, Phoenicia was that area. Okay, they were also called Canaanites, kind of like people use these words interchangeably. And Phoenicia itself was the Greeks called this area Phoenicia. Okay, the more native term probably would have been Canaanite, but they called it Phoenicia, which scholars think that maybe that might have come from the Greek word for purple, because in this area they would have exported a lot of the dyes that would have been very costly to get purple clothing and purple dye for whatever purposes they wanted it, and they sold it other places. And they believe that that's why this would have been called Phoenicia. And of course, Syrophoenicia was that it was a Syrian area. Eventually some of it became part of Syria. So Syrophoenicia would have been a woman who was a Gentile living in that area. She was born probably in Syria and lived in Phoenicia. So that's why she would be Syrophoenician. I love that word. It's like a nice big long word, huh? So anyway, Jesus is making this big trek. It's important to know before you read this, because I did a lot of thinking about this story, because there's some things in it that are a little bit confusing and maybe even upsetting. And you think, Jesus left the Jewish area and went up into the Gentile area to minister to people, to teach, to heal, to do miracles, and he had a crowd following him. You have to ask yourself before you read this, would he have gone into a Gentile area if he didn't believe his message was for the Gentiles? I don't think he would have. Why would he go up there and minister to the people up there, heal people, teach people, tell them about salvation, if salvation wasn't for the Gentiles? Many places in the Bible it tells us salvation is not just for the Jews, it is for the Gentiles. However, God chose to use the Jewish nation to bring Messiah to the world. And so it came first through the Jews and then to the Gentiles. It's really important to know that before we begin to see what Jesus says to this woman. Otherwise, it could be misconstrued. So, he left Galilee. He went north to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Gentile woman who lived there came pleading, "Have mercy on me." Let me go over to Mark and see how Mark describes this same thing. This is in Mark 7, verse 24. Then Jesus left Galilee and went north to the region of Tyre. He didn't want anyone to know which house he was staying in, but he couldn't keep it a secret. Right away, a woman who had heard about him came and fell at his feet. Her little girl was possessed by an evil spirit, and she begged him to cast out the demon from her daughter. Since she was a Gentile born in Syrophoenicia, Jesus told her. Now, since she was a Gentile born in Syrophoenicia, since is just a little tiny word, but it's really important. Sometimes in the Bible we need to zero in on these connecting words. Therefore, then let's go back and find out what it's connected. Or after that, go back and find out what it was connected to. So, since gives causality. This is the reason why he said it the way he did. Okay? Since she was a Syrophoenician. In other words, she's not a Jew. She's a Gentile. He maybe already knows, of course he does, already knows all about her. He knows what she needs to hear. Now, what he's going to say next could be for two reasons. It could be that he's trying to test her, or it could be that he's trying to teach the other people around him, use her as a model of teaching. But here's what he says to her. Jesus told her, "First, I should feed the children, my own family, the Jews. It isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs." I mean, if I were this woman, I would be shocked at that regard. That response. Matthew puts it almost exactly the same way. Jesus responded, "It isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs." So this is what he said to her. And he used kind of a derogatory term that would have been common for the Jews to use. They would have considered Gentiles dogs. In other words, God would more likely bless a dog than he would this woman. It shocks me that Jesus says this because it doesn't to us sound like a very loving response. It almost sounds like a very selfish response. Hey, I got the Jews. I don't need anybody else. I'm here for the Jews. We know that isn't true. And we know it isn't true just because he went to the Gentiles to preach to them. Why would he go there if he didn't feel his message was for the Jews? So somehow he's doing two things here. He's testing the woman's faith, and he's teaching the other people around him and his disciples that this message is for the Gentiles, that Gentiles can be blessed by Jesus. And he pushes the envelope a little bit here by saying to her, "Hey, I'm here for the Jews. Why should I give you the bread? I got to save that for my children." This woman was not fazed at all by that. I guess when you have a sick child, you'll do just about anything. So she swallows her pride and she says to him, this is Matthew 15, verse 27. That's true, Lord, but even the dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath their master's table. I just think that's humility. She believes so much in Jesus' power that she is willing to take any little crumbs of blessing he'll give her. Oh, that we would be that humble. I mean, we ask God for the big things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But she's able to realize that even the smallest little blessing from Jesus would be such a gift. Such a gift. And she's willing to get under the table and just take the crumbs. Mark says almost the same thing. So this is very interesting that they both record this. It must have been an astounding teaching moment. They both put it word for word. In Mark, she replied, "That's true, Lord, but even the dogs under the table are allowed to eat the scraps from the children's plates." She's saying, hey, I know that salvation comes from the Jews, but what's going to trickle down to the rest of us? Even the scraps are going to keep us alive, spiritually alive. I think it's a wonderful picture of someone who is so desperate, they'll take anything. And she believed that Jesus, even if he gave her just a tiny bit, would be an amazing blessing, And she wasn't asking for this blessing for herself. She was asking for her child. Her child was sick. Possessed by an evil spirit is what one version says, and demon possessed is what the other one says. And again, we've been through this before with these. We don't know what that means in modern terms, but know this, she was sick, and she was not herself. And this woman was overwhelmed and beside herself. She didn't know what else to do. And you would do absolutely anything for your daughter, wouldn't you? So she was willing to humble herself for two reasons. First of all, because she really loved her daughter and would do anything for her. But second of all, because she knew even a little from Jesus would do it. She had that kind of faith. And Jesus recognizes that faith. In verse 28 of the Matthew's account, Matthew 15:28, "Dear woman," Jesus said to her, "your faith is great. Your request is granted." And her daughter was instantly healed. Jesus looked at her and he saw great faith. And what you've asked for is yours, he says. It must have been astounding. It must have been astounding for the disciples because they really weren't happy that this woman was here. Remember in Mark's account, it says Jesus didn't want anybody to know where he was because probably big crowds were following him. But this woman found him. And she was apparently wailing and crying and bothering him. Here it says in Mark, it says she begged him to cast out the demon from her daughter. And in the Matthew's account, there's a little bit of extra information here about the disciples. So let's go back to verse 22. "A Gentile woman who lived there came to him pleading, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, for my daughter is possessed by a demon that torments her severely.'" Another point here is she calls him Son of David. That reveals that she knew a little bit about Jesus. Son of David means she's calling him Messiah. She's calling him she doesn't call him rabbi, just teacher. She calls him Son of David. Very, very telling that she has done her homework here. She knows who he is, and she knows that he's got power. But Jesus gave her no reply, not even a word. So at first he didn't tell her about, the dogs and the whole thing. First he just sat there, said nothing. Then his disciples urged him, "Send her away. Tell her to go away," they said. "She's bothering us with all this begging." They weren't very sympathetic, were they? They weren't sympathetic at all. And maybe that's another thing Jesus was trying to teach them, because in the first regard, he kind of sides with the disciples, almost telling her to go away. Then Jesus said to the woman, "I was sent only to help God's lost sheep, the people of Israel." But see how she doesn't give up. She came and worshiped him and pleaded again, "Lord, help me." And then Jesus said, "It isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs." Mark doesn't put this little part about the disciples in, but Matthew does. And I think it's telling. I think it's very instrumental about the fact that this was a teachable moment that Jesus was showing his disciples. Yes, I came through the Jews. Yes, salvation comes through the Jews. But here's a woman who has great faith. She's a Gentile, and she is also going to be blessed. She's going to be blessed by what comes out of the Jews, the Jewish nation. That's exciting, and it was her faith that made her different. Her faith in Jesus is what allowed him to use her as an example. So that's the thing. It's our faith that helps us to be used by Jesus. And he used this whole situation not only to heal the daughter, because that was crucial, but to strengthen the faith of the woman, because once this healing was done, I'm sure her faith was strengthened. And then thirdly, to teach the disciples, say, hey, don't think of yourself as the ones with all the bread who let the crumbs fall. Jesus is there to bless Jew and Gentile. It was instrumental in teaching them. So the Syrophoenician woman had her daughter healed by the grace of Jesus. And I'm sure that encounter with Jesus changed her entire life. I hope you have a good day today, and let the stories of Jesus change your life. Have a good day.